what kind of concessions can you get from the seller that might be to the buyer's advantage?
Of course, anything can be done by a contract. So I guess seller's concessions is pretty broad range. Okay? I mean, you can get the seller to paint the house inside and out and put up a new fence for you, whatever. But I think more or less, I think what you're asking me about is maybe a financial help from the seller.
Oh, yes.
Yes, okay. And that is a major problem nowadays. A lot of people are what I call cash poor. There's a lot of people out there like that nowadays. They have a good job, they got a steady income, but they haven't been able to really save a lot of money. And so here they are wanting to purchase a house or needing some down payment, maybe possibly some down payment money. Then they have all their closing costs, and those all have to be paid, depending on the loan they're getting and all that. So how can we get any help here? Well, one of the ways we can do that is in the contract, there is an area where you can fill in a dollar amount that you want the seller to pay in behalf of the buyer. Basically a credit from the seller to the buyer at the closing. So depending on the type of loan you got, that can be as much as 3 to possibly as much as 6% of the sales price if the seller is willing to do it. And so let's just take an example. We got a $200,000 house, and I've got closing costs, things like that. Now I can't get the seller to pay my down payment for me because the mortgage company's requiring, let's say, that I pay 5% down. They want to see me put in 5%, but I do have other closing costs. Things, mortgage company fees and things we talked about in earlier episodes. Okay, so we could go in there and let's say put 3% in there of that $200,000. That's $6,000. If the seller agrees to pay that, and that is a negotiable thing, we have to work it out. If the seller agrees to pay that, then the buyer will actually the seller will pay up to $6,000 in their closing costs for them, which would help that buyer get into the property for less money out of pocket. Right. Now, one of the things that happens though sometimes is, let's say, Larry, you were asking $200,000 for your property, and I just didn't have enough cash to close. Say I needed an additional $6,000 in closing costs. Well, we may have come down and you want $200,000 for your house. Let's just make this real simple. You're not going to take a dime less. You're going to get $200,000, and then you're going to pay off your mortgage out of that, pay your fees and stuff, and then you're looking at, I want to make this much money off my property. So if you were to pay $6,000 for me, you'd make $6,000 less, correct?
Exactly.
So how are we going to solve that problem? Well, what you see a lot of people do is we go back in, and it's a matter of negotiating back and forth, but I'm trying to keep this simple here. What I'm going to do as your agent, buyer's agent, I may increase the sales price from $200,000 to $206,000.
Okay.
And then ask them to pay $6,000 in closing costs. That way the buyer doesn't have to come up with all those additional fees, and the seller still nets what he wanted to net, doesn't he?
Right.
Okay?
Right.
Now, the only drawback about that is when the property goes under contract, one of the first things the mortgage company does is order an appraisal on it. The mortgage company, contrary to popular belief, most people think that the appraisal is done for the buyer. It's not. It's done for the mortgage company. The buyer pays for it, but the mortgage company requires it. The mortgage company wants to make sure they're not loaning any more money on the property than it's worth. And you can understand that if you're the mortgage company, right?
Exactly.
Okay. So we would have this situation here where we bump the price up $6,000, but what if the property doesn't appraise for $206,000? So that could open up a whole nother set of issues later on after we become a contract, right?
Right.
Because usually the appraisal is done after we agree upon a price. So again, we have to look at those aspects too. So that doesn't always necessarily work. Okay, so again, we have to look at it from that point. But what it really does help the buyer out. And nowadays, that's a major problem that buyers have. Like I said in the beginning, they're just cash poor. They may have good credit, good jobs, but they just don't have any money or very little money. And this is a way around getting enough money so the buyer can Now, what if that didn't work though? What if the house only appraised for 204? So we'd have to, either the seller would have to drop the price $2,000, or pay less in and pay less in closing costs, right? So in that case, the buyer may have to go back to their mortgage company and see if they can maybe take a little higher interest rate and cut some of their fees there. See, so it's a kind of a complicated process.
It sounds like you have to do a lot of different negotiation, either with the seller and his agent, or go back to the mortgage company and try to work a deal that way, so you can get this thing to work out.
You got to make it work.
And it can be on a set of circumstances also on how badly does that seller want to sell that house.
That's correct.
You know,
that goes right back to market conditions.
Exactly.
If the seller's had the house on the market quite a while and no takers, he's more likely to do something like this than if he's had the house on the market for a week and he's had 8 people come by and look at it. He feels like he's going to go under contract at any minute. Probably not as willing to do this, is he?
Right.
So it all goes back to goes back to your agent knowing about the market and what's going on in the area.
Right. So you need that good representation from a real estate agent to get that figured out, especially because it sounds like it really get complicated if you have to do a lot of negotiation to make this thing work.
Well,
It's like putting a jigsaw puzzle together sometimes.
You know, a lot of times that's what we end up doing. We start off, we write up an offer, but through the process, things get rearranged and changed. And sometimes we go back in and renegotiate with the seller after the fact. They're under no obligation to do it, but let's say we go back in and find out that we need an extra $1,000 in closing costs. So we might go in even after the fact, do what we call an amendment to the contract. We amend the thing, raise the price $1,000, and then they agree to pay another $1,000 in closing costs. As long as it appraises, we make the whole thing work that way. Again, if you don't have an agent helping you through this whole process, you can see how complicated it can get for you, can you?
Oh, really?
You say, you know, this is what we do.
Exactly. That's just part of the whole real estate situation.
Just like everything. I don't, work on my own cars anymore because I don't understand them anymore. I take it to a mechanic. So it's the same type thing. Everybody knows what they know.
Well, it kind of reminds me of would you go to a doctor who thought your tonsils were your appendix?
That's right.
You need to have somebody that knows what they're doing.
Right.
I find it interesting that a lot of people, will go to, when it comes to their kids, they're going to try to get the best specialist, let's say if they have a physical problem or something like this. But on other things, they totally drop the ball. But in real estate, like we've said many times on this series, this is one of the biggest financial investments somebody can make in their situation. So that's where you need someone that knows what they're doing when you're coming down to this thing.
Exactly.
Okay, now, as we've gotten through this particular process, what would be the next step beyond this?
There's other parts to the contract.
Okay.
I've hit basically throughout the series, I've hit the high points of it. Of course, there's more to it than this, but I can't talk for a month here.
Right.
So there is one other major aspect that you need to look at within the contract, and that is it's actually the second to last paragraph, I guess, of the contract itself, and it's what we call the termination or the option period. And this is what it is. The buyer usually has to pay a small fee. It can be as little as it can be as little as $1, but more commonly it's maybe $100 to $200. And what it is, it gives the buyer the unrestricted right to cancel the contract without jeopardizing his earnest money for a certain period of time.